Can I tell you a story? Matthew is a junior associate at your company.
Hey.
He follows 250 people and brands on Instagram. He receives roughly 90 emails a day in his work inbox and 35 in his personal email. He follows 22 subreddits full of curated content to amuse him. His fantasy football draft is next week, and he is in an iMessage chain with 15 of his buddies from college, trying to plan their next tailgating outing. He's on 3 online dating platforms. He monitors Twitter a few times a day to keep up with the news. 3 of his Facebook friends have birthdays today. Oh, and he has a full-time job with your company. And you need him to pay attention to a 1,000-word message from the president. Your audience is busy. Every minute, there are 500 hours of video uploaded to YouTube, 150,000 emails sent, 3.8 million Google searches. Your employee audience isn't captive. You don't have their full attention. You are competing with possible paramours, an endless online news cycle, and multiple iterations of sneezing pandas. How can you make your organizational story rise above this noise to claim Matthew's eyeballs for a few precious seconds? Today on the Internal Comms Procast, storytelling coach, author, speaker, and Procter & Gamble historian, Shane Meeker shares his recipe for great business stories. You'll learn why stories matter and how great stories can help your business stand out.
I mean, we're just bombarded with so many stories and so many pieces of story today that it's really important that there's something there that I can feel, so that it kind of stands out in the clutter that we just, sometimes get distracted with. And a lot of memorability comes from not head or heart, but head and heart.
The Internal Comms Procast is sponsored by Circle. Circle's content manager brings all your stories, events, videos, letters, and media mentions into one sortable, searchable content library. Then Circle's AI creates automatically personalized content experiences for your staff on web, email, app, intranet, and mobile. Get more out of your content. Request a demo today at circle.com. That's CERKL.com. Circle, weird spelling, awesome engagement. Welcome to the Internal Comms Procast. I am your host, Barry Williams. Today's guest, Shane Meeker, turned his love of films into a top-notch day job and an enriching side hustle.
So my name is Shane Meeker. I am the company historian and corporate storyteller at Procter & Gamble. And I'm also the founder of Story Mythos, which is basically it's my little side company that I teach and help people learn how to use the power of story. I'm an industrial designer by background, and I was an industrial design leader at P&G for 15 of my 22 years. And about 20 years ago, though, I started to try to write a screenplay, just on the outside of work. It was a hobby thing. I'm a big movie buff, big movie fan. And at some point, every movie buff thinks, oh, I should try to write a movie or something. And I did, and I had an idea, started to write it, and quickly realized that I had no idea what I was doing. And, the reality in anything is there's this big gap that a creative often runs into, and is the gap of watching something versus doing something. Things always look easier when you think about them or watch them versus when you do them. And so I thought, how hard can it be to write a movie? I've seen thousands of them. Well, what I can tell you is no matter how many movies you've watched, it will not help you write one. So I needed to do what Gladwell would call the 10,000 hours, And for those of you in the audience that have not read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, I highly recommend it. But basically, he studied what makes you an expert, and he found that every expert had 2 things in common: how much passion they have for what they do and how much practice they're willing to put against it. And he basically found that it requires a minimum of 10,000 hours of practice, 10,000 hours. So I needed to start to put in my 10,000 hours in screenplay writing. So I started spending my weekends outside of my day job in Los Angeles. I have a brother who lives out there, so I would stay with him sometimes, and I would drive to conferences here, near Cincinnati. I'd go to conferences up near Chicago. I'd start reading any book I could on screenwriting and the psychology of story and mythology, and anything I could do to dig into the world of story, I immersed myself in. And that led me one day to the revelation that, wow, everything I'm learning, I could apply back in the business world. So I went to my boss back at P&G one day and I said, hey, I think I figured out how to use what works in Star Wars to work on innovation problems. And she said, boy, and you have to have the right boss for that, by the way, because, and she was awesome. She's like, well, not sure what you're talking about with that, but it's really intriguing. Why don't you write something up for me? And I did. And in the beginning, it was 5% of my job, and then 15%, and then 50%, and now full time because, as I said in the beginning, my title is the P&G Company Historian and Corporate Storyteller. So for the last, almost over 10 years almost now at P&G, I have been sharing storytelling both inside and outside the company. And because I developed all this externally as a hobby, I'm allowed to share it externally, which is where my Story Mythos company comes in. And I present at companies like Disney, IBM, American Express, ExxonMobil, Anheuser-Busch, US Bank. Every company's got great stories to tell.
Shane believes that storytelling is part of the human experience. With Story Mythos, Shane's been teaching companies how to structure their stories to be more inspiring, memorable, and effective.
I tell you, if there's one key in all of it, and some people are very natural at storytelling, quite frankly, they can do it really well. But everybody is a storyteller at their core. I mean, if there is one single human common denominator, it is that we all love to save, protect, and share stories, along with creating them. So we all do it.
Even though we are all storytellers, some stories are better than others. So what are the building blocks of a good story? For Shane, everything starts with empathy.
So the key in storytelling, and this is really what makes Hollywood work, but it also is critical when it comes to any business, brand, or company as well, and that is empathy. So empathy, by definition is essentially, and I found this great definition from an unknown online, but it's the best I've ever seen. It is seeing with the eyes of another, hearing with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another, right? And this is what makes Hollywood work, is that they can get the audience to jump into the shoes of the characters that you're watching. Of course, for brands and products, that is equally as important, right? It has to feel like it was made for me, that they understand me, that they created this idea for me. As a storyteller, it can never be your story. It has to become the audience's. And this is why you can have empathy for a rat trying to learn to cook. Or you can have empathy for, a sister trying to protect her younger sister in these gladiator games called the Hunger Games. Or you can have empathy for a guy named Walter White, or whatever the case would be. But you can put yourself into the characters. And if you think about your favorite products and your favorite brands, it is because, it really feels like they know me. And they even sometimes in ad campaigns show characters that I can relate with. And that becomes really, really important.
Putting yourself in the shoes of the audience is only part of the battle. The next part might be harder. Shane says a well-crafted story doesn't just make you feel, it sticks with you. To make your stories memorable, Shane says you're going to need to engage the head and the heart.
So empathy is critical, but equally as important is memorability when it comes to business storytelling. But bottom line is, if people don't feel it, they won't remember it. I mean, we're just bombarded with so many stories and so many pieces of story today that it's really important that there's something there that I can feel, so that it kind of stands out in the clutter that we just, sometimes get distracted with. And a lot of memorability comes from not head or heart, but head and heart. So what do I mean by that? It's very easy for businesses and brands sometimes to get, really focus on the data. And data can be helpful. It can. But, people hear statistics, they feel a story. So it's really important that you use story and the heart to kind of pull their attention in, and then back it up with some great data to kind of help with the head part, right? But you need to have a bit of both. Never do head or heart. Always make it head and heart. So empathy and memorability, really, really important in business storytelling.
If you want your organizational content to stand out in a sea of meh, it's time to step up your storytelling chops. You might begin by outlining your story's plot. If your first pass at plot feels a little familiar, don't fret. According to Shane and other storytelling pros, there are only a few plots. Instead, you should focus on the story.
There's a finite number of plots. And that over time, basically people just keep reinventing them and kind of going back to them and updating them, contemporizing them, but redoing them. And I think that's pretty fair. So a plot is just what happens in a story. It's interesting. The second most financially successful plot line really in history is Big Ship Sinks. And that was for a film called Titanic. And of course, everybody knew the ending of that even before they went and saw it. So it's not like people paid necessarily for the plot. The difference between plot and story, if you look at the two, if a plot is what happens, a story is what the characters feel and do because of what happens. And that's what we really pay for, right? That's really what makes the most difference. We don't pay just for what happens. We pay to see what the people will do because of it. So we always pay for the characters. We pay for the human experience. We pay for the human interaction. So we didn't pay to see a ship sink. We paid to see what Jack and Rose would do because of it. We paid to see what the crew would do. We paid to see what the passengers would do, because I can't have empathy for a ship, but I can try to have empathy for someone on one that is sinking. So that's always the key. I'm not saying plot is not important, but they're pretty limited. So what's more important is how you create a human experience and understanding through that plot.
Now that you have your basic outline taken care of, you will need to identify who will play the most important role in your story, the hero. For internal communicators, most of your story heroes should be employees.
The first is you've got to have a strong hero. Hero is one of the top ingredients that every story has to have. And a hero is the window into the story. They are the source of empathy. If I don't like the hero, usually it's very hard, if not impossible, to follow the story. If I don't believe in the hero at some level, it's hard. If I don't think what the hero is trying to do is worth doing, it's hard. So the hero is really important, that you create an engagement and a deep character with tension and flaw, but purpose and, an emotion, and really deliver that well for the audience to relate to.
The next thing your superb business story needs is an obstacle. Your hero needs an identifiable difficulty that is worth growing for. Shane says that the obstacle is the lifeblood of your story. Here's why it matters.
That is the lifeblood of your story. So Robert McKee, a very famous script doctor and screenwriter, teacher as well, has a great quote where he basically says your story can only be as powerful as the forces of antagonism allow it to be. In other words, weak problem, weak story. And it's interesting, everyone in the audience, think about, as business builders and entrepreneurs and brand builders, if the problem that your product or brand or service solves is really seen as a small problem, that makes it really tough usually for it to be a big idea. So you can usually look back at products in a company's history that have not done well. And quite honestly, although hindsight's 20/20, it usually comes down to, did it really solve a big enough problem? Or did we not do a good enough job explaining how big that problem actually is? But the size of the problem creates the power in a story.
And finally, your story needs treasure.
And there has to be a powerful treasure that actually motivates your hero to want to go through the obstacle to get to it. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So the treasure has to be very clear to the hero. They have to be able to see where they're going with it, how it would help them to make it worth going through the obstacle. You have to have a powerful hero that I can relate to and have empathy for. You have to have a strong obstacle, because that creates the lifeblood of the story, the emotion that's really behind what the hero is doing. And you have to have a treasure that will properly motivate the hero to want to get to the end, that they would be willing to deal with trouble.
Coming up on the Internal Comms Procast, we will unveil what role your organization should play in your stories, and how your obsessive email checking is training you to be an obsessive email checker. Internal Comms Pro is proud to present the Rise and Shine series, coming to a city near you. Rise and Shine gives you access to what's hot and brewing in the internal comms world. Each event, a featured speaker will talk about the most current strategies, best practices, latest trends, and tools that drive performance. Then an expert panel will share actual work products and their secrets on how they applied the speaker's topic in their own organizations. Rise and Shine is free to attend, but spots are limited. See where we are going to be next and join the fun for free at internalcommspro.com/shine. We are back with more from storytelling Sherpa, Shane Meeker. So what role should your organization or leadership play in your story? You might be tempted to cast your org or leaders as the hero. Shane says don't do it. You have another role to play.
Never, ever, ever make your brand the hero. Never make your business the hero. Never make your company the hero. The people you serve are always the hero. Your customer and your consumer are always the hero. And of course, you don't want to be the obstacle. And you also aren't the treasure, because what you probably offer to them, they can find other ways to get also. So let's say they want peace of mind. They want confidence. There's lots of ways to do that without your brand. So you're not the treasure either. So the question is, of a hero, obstacle, and treasure, which one is your brand, product, or company? And there's this interesting character that always shows up right when there's trouble, oddly enough, in storytelling. And it's a character archetype called the mentor. And a mentor's role in a story is to guide and inspire the hero and to give the hero items that will help them on their journey. And that is what a brand or a company or a product is. It is there to guide and inspire its heroes, which are its consumers and its users and its customers. And it's there to provide them with items, which could be a service or a physical object or whatever it is that will help that consumer on their journey. So always unleash your inner Dumbledore, I'll call it, or your Glinda the Good Witch, and make sure that you show your heroes the yellow brick road and maybe even give them some ruby slippers to wear on it.
When you are working on your company's storytelling, it can seem overwhelming, like you need to reinvent the wheel. Shane says to focus on what emotion you are trying to convey and study who does it best. Here's how he walks storytellers through the process in his workshops.
Let's say they were wanting to tell a story to get everyone in the company really excited about something. It was about, inspiration. Then I'd say, great. What company, brand, product, whatever, is great at sharing stories of inspiration? And then we brainstorm that and I'd say, great, now go study them and see what you can take from them and put back into your industry. So let's say I was talking to, a dry cleaning company. And I said, what is it you deliver at the highest level? And they may say clean clothes, I'd say, go higher. And eventually I'm sure I'd get them to, we have to have great customer service. I'd say, that's great. So who does customer service really, really well that you could learn from? And I'd say, stay away from dry cleaning. Don't tell me any other dry cleaners. I want to know completely outside of your industry who that would be. And maybe they would say Walt Disney. They would say Nordstrom's. They would say Zappos. They would say Amazon. They would say the Ritz-Carlton. I'd say, awesome. Those are great examples. Go study them and see how you could take and learn from Walt Disney to apply it into dry cleaning. And that's where a lot of great story insight starts, is when you take great ideas from other places like serendipity and you remix it into your need. And you add your own personal extra bits to it, and you make it relevant to your company and your team. So part of the moral of that story is, to be a great storyteller, you need to kind of study the stories that you love, regardless of where they're from, find out what's working in them, pull them apart, and then ask yourself, how can I use those parts?
So, you want to tell better stories, and now you know what makes a great story, but you will not get better overnight. Shane suggests you make time in your daily life to practice telling stories.
How often do you sit and really practice writing and sharing, and creating compelling stories that will stand the test of time? And I often tell groups when I, reference Gladwell's example of the 10,000 hours of, what are you spending most of the hours in your day doing? So, because that's what you're training yourself to be an expert at. So if you're answering emails or you're sitting in meetings or whatever, that's what you're training yourself to, be an expert at. So it's always important at some portion of your day to really focus on, what is the story today? What is the story that I would share after today? Writing a story about a presentation, jumping up in front of your team, maybe at your Monday morning connect, to share a quick 5-minute narrative on something that you saw or inspiring that you read. I don't know. but practice storytelling at least sometime during each day.
We want to thank Shane for sharing his storytelling insight. If you want to learn more about becoming a better business storyteller, be sure to check out his book, Story Mythos, a movie guide to better business stories, on Amazon. You can enter to win one of 2 free copies of Shane's book on our website, internalcommspro.com/podcast. Just look for this episode's page and enter to win. Best of luck! While you're on our site, you should sign up for the Internal Comms Pro newsletter. Each week, we deliver a free personalized email newsletter full of news, events, and best practices from our collective of trusted internal communications thought leaders. Next time on the Internal Comms Procast, we are wrapping up our first season on a massive high note. Internal communications influencer and educator Rachel Miller will share her favorite tips on communicating change. Rachel is the founder of All Things IC and a co-founder of the IC Crowd. It's a conversation you don't want to miss. Internal Comms Procast is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our executive producer is Rachel Foles, Connor Sweeney is our engineer, and Michael Musili is our digital media specialist. Our theme music is Please Listen Carefully by Jawser via the Free Music Archive. Show notes and more are available at internalcommspro.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Internal Comm Pro. Thank you for listening.